Good morning and welcome back to Late Start Show. We are here with U.S. class of 85, philanthropist and former president and chairman of Hartzell Propeller, Mr. Joe Brown. How are you, Mr. Brown?
Oh, this is a great morning, beautiful morning. Good to see you guys.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for taking the time to do this. So, we usually start at the beginning, so we want to do that with you. Where did you grow up and what brought you to university school?
Well, I grew up in Shaker Heights, 2991 Eaton Road, which I had to memorize as a child so I could get myself home. Went to Malvern School in that neighborhood. It was absolutely magical. Um, and it turned out that all those neighborhood kids, about half of them went to US, Laurel, and HB, and about half of them stayed in the Shaker Public School. So over time, that kind of put HB on the map for my sisters and university school on the map for my brother and me. And so we were raised in Shaker, lived in Shaker our whole lives, went to both schools.
Great. And can you kind of like recall any teachers or classes kind of from your U.S. days that really kind of had a big impact on you, or kind of
Absolutely.
some memories that you still have?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a gratitude session for me. I started in seventh grade, and at the lower school, there were two teachers that really stood out. One was Peter Conway, and one was David Reinthal, and they partnered in social studies. Their big contribution to my life was to treat us seriously as young adults. And they did moot courts, or we had to argue real cases. They brought in attorneys that were parents of students to serve as jurists. And these things were just full-fledged intellectual brawls, trying to win over the jury. And I was both a defense attorney and a prosecuting attorney in two different moot court cases. And it lit me up. It made the lower school experience for me. And when I got to the upper school, I was a terrible student in certain subjects, terrible. And there were three teachers that just tolerated my absolute amateur performance. One was Marilyn Stoller in Algebra 2. Another one was Roger Deed in French. And then Phil Thornton in geometry, who was also my soccer coach. And I want to mention those guys because they took care of students who weren't their best students and kept you going. And then the guy that really lit me up and prepared me for college, and Rob Markey mentioned him, was Rob Thomas, American Civ. And he really taught me how to write and find my narrative voice. And by the time I left his class, I was ready to go.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. And obviously, a big part of US is the academics, but also the athletics. So, what sports or extracurricular activities did you get involved in at US, and how did they influence your experience?
I was a soccer player, beginning in seventh grade all the way through senior year. And that was important to me. But really, what US, I would say, did for me that I wanted to share with you is I went to US day camp starting as a chick and went all the way through. And they had a woodshop program for kids that were like 5 years old. And it just persisted year after year. And then when I got to seventh grade, Bob Osmond was my shop teacher. And that guy took a real interest in me. When I got to the upper school, Ralph Howarth was a shop teacher who took deeper interest in me yet. And then I don't know if you know Dan Dixon, who recently retired from university school. He's just like this unbelievably talented guy, probably the most talented guy I know. And he gave me a job in carpentry and contracting. And all that woodshop stuff set the stage for what would become my career. I didn't know it, but it clearly was the foundation of going into manufacturing. So woodshop in US, big thing.
Looking back at your time as US as a whole, obviously we can think of some of the kind of the funniest moments, maybe just a particular event that makes you kind of smile when you think about it. Do you really have a memory that like kind of either your high school, your middle school, kind of any of your US experience that really just to this day stands out with you?
Yeah, I mean, I have a ton, but I was dance committee chairman. I took this job extremely seriously. Like I wanted the biggest dances with the greatest gate revenue and so on. So we had this dance at the upper school. You probably saw those big round tables in the dining hall. These things were massive. So we had to move all these things out for the dances. And at the end of this blockbuster dance with this live band, all these girls from HB were standing on one of these round top tables. And ultimately their weight made the tabletop break loose and fall on the ground. And it turned out that there was these two large screws sticking out of the bottom of the table, and it made it spin like a top. And so we would get the girls in the middle of this thing and we were spinning it, and it was walking around the dance floor with these girls on it. It was like the greatest thing. Well, it turns out the next day I go in there to clean up, and Dan Dixon, the very Dan Dixon I just mentioned, says, Joe, what the hell did you guys do at this dance? I said, what are you talking about? He said, there's like these gouges across this entire parquet dining room floor. Well, these screws were just cutting a track through all this parquet. And Dan had the skill to actually figure out how to fix this. It was a really big deal. And he just kept it under the radar, fixed the floor. And so later on, when I worked for him, and I worked at maintenance in university schools, maintenance group, every time they would send me to do a chore in the dining hall, Dan would always say, no, not the dining hall, the Joe Brown Save the Last Dance for Me dining hall. And he's like, every freaking time the dining hall came up, and I still laugh about that.
That's really good. After kind of US, you really kind of went to Middlebury. What attracted you to Middlebury College, and how did you kind of decide to go there?
Well, I have to say, I did the college trips that kids do. And when we pulled into Middlebury, it was love at first sight. It literally took my breath away. I didn't think I would be able to get in. I probably shouldn't have gotten in at that time. I was sort of a mixed bag academically, strong in my last 2 years and not so strong in my first 2 years. Um, Dr. Hawley, who was headmaster at the time, had gone to Middlebury. And I got a spontaneous interview, and we drove up there from Cleveland, 10-hour drive. And the love persisted. I guess I talked my way in. Certainly, Dr. Hawley had a hand in it. And so when I got there, I was extremely motivated to perform because I had some sense that I was probably sitting in a seat that might have gone to somebody else and maybe should have. And it launched me into Middlebury with a real sense of purpose.
Yeah, and what exactly did you study at Middlebury? And like US, were there any professors or classes that inspired you during college?
Yeah, I was a political science major. I thought for a while I'd probably become an attorney. But I just like that. I just like that work, and let you cross into history and philosophy and a lot of other things. I had great professors, but I'll just tell you about this one professor, Susan Gray. She assigned a 10-page paper on primary source literature. It had to come from the Antiquities Library. So I read this personal journal, Moving to Michigan, which was the Western frontier written by this young woman. So I wrote this 10-page paper, my first paper for her freshman year. She wrote me a 5-page response. And what I learned immediately was they expect me to be a scholar. This is not about grades. I'm not a student. It's not homework. They're asking me to be a scholar, and they're taking me seriously. And Susan Gray completely changed my concept of what was expected of me in college and what I wanted to put into it. So that was a pretty cool experience.
Yeah, and we'll get into more of your career, but just as a spoiler, you spent a lot of time in the aviation industry. Did Middlebury College in any way prepare you or give you skills that helped you in that career?
Yeah, I mean, between university school and Middlebury, the overall concept of those educational models is to make you a broad thinker, make you a person who is excited about entering new domains, who's not worried about knowing the answer right now because you can dig in and get the answer. And so I think really for me, almost everything I did in work was new. I mean, at first it was new to just be in manufacturing, then it was new to have different roles and duties, and then it was new to buy companies that we had never worked in before, and now we're supposed to figure out how to make them run. So this interest in lifelong learning and tackling new challenges and synthesizing hard questions, those are the things that came out of my education.
You kind of you let's kind of go to the part about kind of your career. What was your first job after college? What were those kind of few years after college, and kind of getting to the rest of your career? What did your kind of career as a whole look like?
Yeah. Well, my parents had a general rule that you had to have a job at 13 and it had to be in the trades, some kind of trade. So my sisters pumped gas. My brother worked on a seismic crew. He was also an all-star caddy, I might add. Um, and I worked in commercial painting and construction. So when I got to college, my dad somehow managed to pull off the deal of the century, which was to buy this company, Hartzell Propeller. I think I was a junior. He didn't have any money, so he borrowed 100% of the purchase price. And Dan Dixon and I went down to see it. And Dan, again, being the mentor he was to me, said, "Oh my God, this is the greatest machine shop I've ever seen." It was an incredible manufacturing company. And it really motivated me to think, man, maybe I could be part of this for a little while and help my dad. So it turns out my first job out of college was going to work on the plant floor at Hartzell Propeller. I thought I'd stay a couple of years, try to be useful to my dad, and then move on. And I never did. So I started there. I ended up in production control, which is really about moving parts through the plant after making some of those parts. And it really turned me, I guess, over the long term into an ops guy, operations. And everything I did after that was grounded in operations, quality products on time, shorter lead times, lower cost. That's the mantra. And I had a great career. Loved every minute of it.
And now aviation that you worked with for so long is a passion of yours. Did you develop that? Like, had you already had that interest going into your career with Hartzell, or did you kind of develop that as you worked with in the company?
No, that must have been in me at birth. My father was a pilot. He was a Navy pilot in the 50s, fighter pilot off the USS von Hammarskjöld. And he was a hero figure to me. But I mean, I think the first thing I ever drew was an airplane. The first thing I ever built in my little wood shop in my basement was an airplane. So I always had that interest. And Hartzell, of course, created this launch pad for a broad exposure to aviation and to be a pilot and to fly a lot, fly with my dad. So that alignment was made in heaven for me. The operations side, the trade side, and then the fact that it was aviation just kind of made it perfect.
Did you ever kind of develop a love for flying enough to kind of get a flight license and kind of go up there yourself? Like throughout your career, did you kind of mix the two, the manufacturing side with kind of just the flying?
Um, well, it turned out that my job over time um, had a lot of outward facing work in sales and essentially promoting the company. And since all of our customers built airplanes, they were almost all on airstrips somewhere. So the job of getting to your customer involved flying there. And we had a flight department, we had a hangar. We operated several aircraft that had propellers on them, as you might imagine. And I flew all over the country. I mean, Canada, I was flying 500 hours a year and doing that for work. And then, of course, it's my hobby as well. So the minute work's done, we all get together and go fly again. And so work and flying were daily connected.
And you and your brother Jim eventually took over the company from your father. How did you balance family and business when you both ran the company together?
We didn't. We threw everything in our lives into the same bucket. We were partners. We lived in the same town. We sent our kids to the same school. They played on the same team. We did Halloween together. We had every Christmas together. Uh, we were so overlapping in our Venn diagram, so to speak, that there was no separating our family life from our work life. And I will say that creates some of the greatest rewards you can have with your partner. My brother was my best man in my wedding, and I was his best man. So we had a great kinship. But that overlap can lead to some really challenging times when things aren't going so well. And we had some patches that we had to work through. But you never get separated because everything's connected. So you got to live with each and every part of your coexisting life. But I'll say, man, we figured it out. And our home stretch was as collegial and connected and loving as you could ever have with a brother and a partner. And what a journey. Incredible.
In 2004, you and Jim formed Tailwind Technologies to kind of expand even further than propellers. What inspired that move into kind of like a holding company with multiple aviation businesses?
Yeah. Well, you guys are probably too young to remember, but you have maybe a sense of it. You know, the 33 record album, the vinyl albums that are kind of coming back and people are buying them to play music on, you know, you put them on the turntable. I'm literally talking to you like, you know, I'm an ancient historian or something, but record albums were the music currency of our day. And they literally were wiped off the face of the earth by the compact disc. Um, Kodak was a titan company of our day, and it was pretty much wiped off the face of the earth by digital cameras. So we had the sense that we were living in a time where companies based on technology could be thriving one day and dead the next. Like you could just have the tides turn against your technology. And propellers, you know, have been around since the Wright brothers. And you had to think at some point we were going to enter a Jetsons age and, you know, jets were going to displace propellers. So we were committed to this notion of hedging the sources and opportunities for our careers, for our coworkers' careers. So we wanted to buy companies that diversified our propeller business. And it turns out over the length of our career, it was not a buggy whip business. It was not Kodak. We continued to grow and be strong in that business, but we also ended up with all these other amazing experiences at all these other great companies. So it was cool. It's really fun.
And I want to touch on that connection to the Wright brothers a little bit. I believe Hartzell Propellers has a connection to the Wright brothers. Can you explain that if that is true?
It's definitely true. You know, those guys were trying to figure out how to take this amazing thing that they developed, you know, the ability to fly and commercialize it in some way. And they got this contract for the essentially newly founded Army Air Corps to build aircraft for them and the Dayton Wright Aircraft Company. And they had to build out a little supply chain. One of their number one failures in their own experimentation had been with propellers because they take such an amazing amount of load. And this guy named Robert Hartzell was a young man. He wanted to be a barnstormer pilot. His parents owned a lumber business. And they said, you cannot be a barnstormer, but you can go into aviation. So he started something called the Hartzell Propeller, the Hartzell Walnut Propeller Company. And he's the guy that invented the motto, built on honor, I might add. That was in 1917. And my brother and I were at the helm of the company together when it turned 100, which was really, really cool. Really cool.
And then going to that motto of built on honor, I think that's such a unique motto for a company. So, how did you and your brother integrate honor and integrity into the culture of the company as it grew?
Well, I have to say that that part of that of Ohio, West Central Ohio, is a high integrity uh, place to do work and life in. You know, the people there, a lot of them are in Catholic parish towns. They're very civic minded. They care about their neighbors. So the ethics of our community were extremely strong. So when you say to somebody at work, you know, built on honor is what we stand for, they go, of course. It wasn't like some new idea to them. What was really, really powerful about that is it supersedes rules, it supersedes handbooks. You don't need a lot of policies. If you come to work and your mission is to build on honor, you're really inviting every person to bring their best selves and their best values to the job. You know, and in a company like that, quality is critical. I mean, it's absolutely crucial, and you're depending on people who step up to the highest standards. So to us, it was a unifying theme for everybody that worked there, and it set an expectation that we would all strive to meet. And it kept life pretty simple. You know, at the end of the day, you do the right thing, period.
You know, the culture here is kind of largely built on this kind of brotherhood and community kind of at US. How did those ideals play out throughout your life? I mean, you kind of talked about the idea with Hartzell and how you guys are built on honor with that integrity, but kind of even going throughout your life when it comes to US, Middlebury, even with aviation, even to now, how do you feel like that idea of that kind of community culture really come together?
You know, when I thought about that question, because you gave me a little teaser on that, I thought immediately I should tell you that, you know, two of my closest lifelong friends are both U.S. guys. One is Bill Champ, still works at University School. And one is Randy Markey, distinguished graduate. And we met when we were 5, and we shared U.S. Day Camp. And And for me, then the lower school and the upper school. And I still am in just regular contact. These guys are like brothers to me. And, when I got to US as a seventh grader, they embraced me like I had been there the whole time. So there was something about the US culture that just caused kids to recognize they're going to share their lives together. And long after US. And then, of course, in our business, 4 US guys made up our board, and they were older than us, and their coaching and counseling was absolutely a game changer on the quality of the companies, and the quality of our leadership and management competency. And that's Mark Burns and Rob McCreary and Brent Ballard and Dick Hollington. And, those guys, they did that for brotherhood. They just wanted to see us be successful. They wanted to honor my dad, who they really liked, and it was always personal. So, I do feel that US has a special ability to build connection for a lifetime among kids that go there.
Yeah, and you mentioned some of those people as being kind of mentors in your business, but I would imagine your father also had a large impact on your business career as he had a long and successful career as well. So, what's one piece of advice from him that you still remember and use? Whether
Oh,
that's
that guy was,
if it's in
that,
business
that,
or just life. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Oh, that guy was larger than life to me and a lot of other people. Just a terrific, terrific guy. But he did say certain things. They were mantras in our family. They were mantras to me. So it's not just one, but it's not too many. The first one was, let's go be somebody. He'd walk into a room, be struggling with a problem. He'd say, let's go be somebody. And it just put things in context. Like, we're out and about. We got to get things done. He used to say that he believed in the 11th commandment, which was, thou shalt go for it. And that's definitely a family mantra. And then when we were all jammed up, he would say, do something, even if it's wrong. And he didn't mean wrong on a moral level. He meant, let's go with the power of motion. Let's just get cracking. We'll figure it out, but we're not going to figure it out sort of hanging around. So he was a guy that inspired you to just do and not worry about failure, not worry about whether you had it perfect, just get going. And that really worked for me. I have to say, maybe I respond to those things so much. But the last thing he said, and I want to say it to you guys, because I think this is actually something we should always strive to remember. He would always say, we need the best athletes on the team. And so he's a very smart guy, but he was always trolling for people who were smart and capable to join the company. He was just a guy always searching for the talent that could make that difference. And, we were in West Central Ohio. It's not like, we were right on the edge of the cornfields of the Great Plains. But we had some powerhouse talent in that place because he was always looking for it.
And what made someone so appealing to your father or to you to hire? Like when someone came and said, "I want to work for Hartzell Propellers," what did you look for in that person?
Well, he believed a lot in people that, um, I guess the phrase these days is lean in, but really, really took their education seriously. It didn't have to be Ivy League or some such thing, but people who really devoted themselves to education, did well in school, took tough majors. He was a chemical engineer, so he loved guys that did engineering. Um, but really, it was energy level, work ethic. He could see the person who would respond to the notion, let's go be somebody. And those are the people he always tried to bring into his life and mentor. And there's a bunch of them that went to US, I might add. So, he just kindred spirits, I would say, with a lot of intellectual horsepower. That's what he was looking for.
In October 2023, you sold Hartzell Aviation to Arclam. How do you kind of come to the decision to sell after 37 years as really just stewards of the company?
Yeah, I mean, at the base, that's a heartbreaking decision. I mean, I had not very much daylight between the work and my own sense of personal identity, and I thought we would maybe be able to take that business through a family transition and maybe get another generation in there. But we experienced this thing. I would say the paradox of success is that with the help of the board and a great team, we built a company that really got too big to make a in-house transfer. And, it was successful and it needed somebody who was really a professional buyer. So we did not have a good succession plan inside the family. So we had to look outside. And, our partnership involved people that were slightly different in age, and some of them were ready to devote the rest of their life to new challenges. And so as a partnership, we just decided we would test the market. I didn't think it was going to sell, by the way. This was in the middle of, sort of the COVID interest rates, and I didn't think anybody would finance a deal. I was wrong. And in a handful of months, I was cleaning out my office wondering, how did that happen? But it did. And, in some ways, I'm teasing, I clearly understood it was a good decision for a lot of reasons. And my partners just crushed the process of going to market, absolutely crushed it. So the deal went very smoothly and it was successful. And I didn't have much to do with that. I was still in the operations, trying to get product shipped. But it was the end of a great tour. I'm happy for the team going forward. The best people are still running those companies, but I missed it.
Have you had any either kind of really, really memorable flights or kind of just adventures in the air or maybe a long cross country? Obviously, you said that you did about 500 miles, uh, which is just crazy, right? So, do you have some memorable moments in the air or just even working on the company and working on the ground?
Yeah, I flew a lot, so there's a bunch of them. But when my dad died, I did describe one flight in the eulogy that meant a lot to me. And, he was the sponsor of my flying. And he was directly responsible for me having those opportunities. And we were flying up to Cleveland one day and it was terrible weather. We were going in Burke Lakefront. And unlike the normal course of events, he was going to fly with me. I was going to fly in an airplane that I was using. He was going to ride in the right seat. And that had often been flipped the other way. So this was really my first time to show my chops in challenging circumstances to my dad. And the second he closed the door, he went absolutely full passenger. You would think this guy had never been in an airplane before. He wouldn't look at any of my gauges. He would look at me. He just spent the whole time looking out the window because he was signaling to me, you got this, I'm out, hand it. And when I landed at Burke, it was windy and gusty and rainy and terrible. And the flight turned out pretty good. And then he leaned over to me and he gave me a little dap on the thigh and said, good hop. And I'll never forget it. It was like the ultimate moment of kind of graduating into the league of my father, not as a pilot, but as somebody who shared that passion with him. And it was his endorsement that meant the world to me.
Well, that's amazing. I want to turn here a little bit to your philanthropy work. You co-founded the Yellow House community in Vermont. Can you tell us what Yellow House is and why you helped start it?
Yeah. And, I don't use the word philanthropist for myself. I just like so many people that come out of university school and all the great schools in Cleveland. We were all raised with a civic uh, mindset. You're supposed to deliver something back to the place you call home. But in the case of Yellow House, I have 4 children, one of whom is special needs. And, she's going to need lifelong care. She'll be dependent on others for the extent of her life. And we have the goal of a lot of families that have special needs children, which is to build some kind of residential experience for them that's independent. And so we moved to Vermont to open it in the town of Middlebury because all my other kids went to Middlebury. So we figured this would be a center of gravity for the long haul. And we house a crew of special needs adults. We have a staff that looks after them 24/7, 365. We're in our 5th year, and I will say the great byproduct of that is not just the independent living experience, but all these kids are growing because they have to live real life together. And, there's no parents to sort of cut to the answer and take care of their needs. They got to figure it out. So it's been very successful. We're really proud of our daughter, really proud of that place.
What lessons have you learned from your daughter through some of those challenges that I'm sure you've faced? But what lessons have you learned from her that you don't think you would have in a different case?
My daughter's special needs make her dependent, but she was also blessed with the most profound empathy and social IQ, absolutely off the charts. And so, she meets the world with this joyful spirit, this loving spirit, and she makes her neighborhood better. She makes her friend group better. She makes Middlebury better. And the thing I've learned from her, and man, I just try to build on this in my own life, is meet the world with a happy heart, and you will make the world a little better just by that. And that's what she does. She makes me laugh all the time. She gives me a youthful spirit. She loves to party. She loves rock and roll. So, she's just a joyful soul, and it's infectious.
In addition to Yellow House, you and Jim made a big gift to create a home for the Center for the to create a home for the Center for the Education of Boys at US. What really motivated you to support that cause, and how have you kind of stayed involved with University School now, whether it's visiting the campus or kind of just talking with students like us?
Well, that gift, at least from my perspective, was a testimony to Art Burns, Rob McCurry, Brent Ballard, Dick Hollington. That I think every one of those guys has been board president of University School, and they've all served on the board, and they all serve Cleveland civically. I mean, these guys are just powerhouse men, um, and do good. So that was our way of trying to say thank you for the fact that they put us on the list of people to help. They helped our companies for a decade or more, and so that was that. My brother stayed involved. He's on the board at University School now. I tended to be more focused on Middlebury, partly because I live here and had three kids go there. But from the standpoint of University School, I'm still very close to a number of my classmates, and we do join together in some local Cleveland activities, including the Life Act Golf Tournament, which is, aimed at educating youth about depression and risk of suicide. And that's because we lost one of our class of '85 friends way too young, and so we stick together on that.
And as you look back on your career, do a little reflection exercise here. I mean, you've basically done it all. You've had a very successful career. You've had children that have grown up. But how do you define success at this point in your life?
Probably in my 40s, if I was honest, I would have said perform, achieve, and deliver. And I think give back was on that list as well, but I didn't have as much time to do that. So I would say the script now is sort of give back, support, promote, find people and things that you can give back to, support and promote. And it's a very personal time for me. It's less about what I do, and it's more about who I'm with and who I can help if I can be of help. And I'm so blessed. It's absurd, and I hope you guys feel that way in your own life. All through it, and especially when you get to what I call the wisdom phase. Um, but I just have a lot of good things in my life, and it gives me a lot of opportunities to take on missions and be part of things. It's fantastic.
Kind of following that, is there anything you would do differently if you were starting your career today?
Oh my God, no. If I did one thing differently, I'd change the whole vector. If I'm reincarnated, I want this every time. It's been incredible. It's unfair. It's so good.
And that idea of gratitude, how do you continue? Because I'm sure it wasn't smooth sailing the entire career that you had with Hartzell, but how did you manage to kind of stay grateful for what you have? And how do you think people in general can just be more grateful and reflect on what they have, not what they don't have?
Yeah, I don't know. I always loved the exercise in trying to take something from its current state to a more excellent state. And it really wasn't about money. It wasn't about recognition. It was about the endeavor, the work of understanding complex things and trying to figure out how to tune them up to better form. And it was so rewarding that I was literally grateful all the time for just the opportunities to go find the next challenge, work on it with great people. And what I found along the way is that is how most people are wired. If you can do something that you feel is purposeful with a strong group of peers. Most people feel a lot of gratitude in their life. And so if they can't find it at work, they got to find it at a church or a club or coaching their kids or whatever it might be. But I think in the end, the thing that drives gratitude is connecting to something that gives you a sense of purpose, and then it's just automatic.
Kind of speaking of the future, are there any kind of big project or ideas that you still kind of really hope to pursue now that Hartzell's with the new owner and that you're in kind of, as you said, that wisdom stage of life?
Yeah. We got to figure out how to get Yellow House to survive our death, because at some point our child's going to be dependent on an organization that we're not there to support directly. It's got to be in the hands of others, and it's got to outlast us, and it's got to last as long as her life. That's a big challenge. That's a 40, 50-year plan. Well, no, it might be a 60-year plan. So that's a big project. And we also have to learn to make that place work as they age, because they're all young and do cool stuff. And someday they're going to be old people. Um, and I'm really interested in the state of education in this country. I don't think it's doing a very good job, notwithstanding the excellence of a place like University School. But, we're not producing the best the best kids when it comes to education. We gotta go through some kind of really important education reform, or we're going to lose ground. And this country is too important to let that happen.
Why do you think maybe that is happening, and what do you think kids can do, even if their school isn't providing them the best education, to give themselves their own kind of education in order to be the best when they come out of school?
Well, it's a very complicated question, and some of it's the politics in education, and some of it's the broadening of access to education has made it hard to know what a fair standard is. Kids come in with different levels of preparation. It has nothing to do with whether they're a great intellectual athlete. It just is a function of how much training they've had. So we're trying to meet this much broader dynamic, and educate with more variation in the student body at all levels. But I also think, there's a breakdown in the ethics in society. And so we don't even know how to declare what standards we're chasing anymore for an educated life. What does that really mean? So I think we have to get back to basics. I think schools will do well if they remember that the whole goal is to build ethical citizens with the capacity to think deeply. And you guys live at a time where almost none of that is present in the public domain. It's hashtags, it's Instagram, it's shallow, it's binary thinking, it's political warfare. It's not deep cognition, it's not ethics-based cognition. And so we have to get back to that. And I would say to you guys, your challenges are immense in your generation. It has nothing to do with you. It's what's going on around you. You live in a time where public institutions, in my mind, are shallow and broken. You live in a time where it's hard to identify public leaders we would all universally admire. That wasn't true even 25 years ago. So you're the restoration generation in my mind. And you guys have to, unfortunately, you have the job of being deeper thinkers and sort of overcome the trends of our time. And on the other hand, I think you have a great opportunity, which is that you yourselves and your peers are showing up into a world in which the person who comes early, stays late, and works hard will appear to be a franchise player very quickly. You, in this world, will be rock stars if you throw yourself at the work, if you throw yourself at your opportunities. And so you have a lot on your plate, but I'm very optimistic about your success quotients.
And speaking of those opportunities that you talked about, what do you think some of the biggest opportunities for us are? Because I feel like a lot of times we're bombarded with all the negativities of the difficulties of what we're going into, what we're entering into. But what are some of the opportunities that you see that we can kind of capitalize on from your perspective?
I don't know if you've ever gone into a room where there's a natural tension in the situation. You know that there's going to be some friction and conflict. And there's that person in the room that just has a demeanor of leaderly bearing because they're thoughtful, they care what other people think. And the room kind of settles down and gravitates to that model. That person who just says, we could talk about this. We can all get through this. That kind of leaderly competence, we need a lot more of. But the people who possess it can, I think, over time, supercharge the civic duties we all used to be raised in. They can supercharge the cohesion of teams they serve on. So it sounds grand and also too general. But I think the opportunity is for your generation to produce the kind of thoughtful leader that starts reconnecting people at the fundamental level while we do the hard things in life, like jobs and help municipalities thrive and fix education. But it's going to come down to personal character, personal quality. And so you guys are tuning your own personal code right now. And when you take that into the world, it can make a big difference. And I encourage you guys to see the world as a place you need to meet the code, your own code.
One of the things we always love to ask in every single one of our episodes is, what is your why? What motivates you to really get out in the morning and keep going after all these years and really have a passion in everything you do?
Well, I have to say, right now, my life is just filled with delight in what's going on in my kids' lives. Cannot wait to wake up and be a cheerleader for what's happening for them. I'm off the road. I used to travel a lot. And so I'm definitely waking up for the story of their lives. Um, I'm waking up for the story of my new grandchild's life. My daughter had her first child, our first grandchild. But really, I'm waking up to pay it, pay it back and pay it forward. I just so many good things have happened in my life. I have an incredible wife. Our marriage is good. Like I got time to deliver on all that, and that's what I'm working on. Just trying to pay it back.
Well, Mr. Brown, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been great having you on the show today. And thank you so much for taking the time to share your insights and experiences with us. And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. And we'll hope you'll join us next Wednesday for the next episode of Late Start Show. Thank you, Mr. Brown.